Mic check, mic check. What's going on, world? You already know it's your boy SB, and I'd like to welcome you back to another installment of the Sauce Files. As always, I hope you're doing what you got to do to get to where you got to be. On today's episode, we talk about what faith really is and the one key attribute that it shares with fear. I talk about having faith a lot, and I don't think I've ever broken it down like this, but I believe it's time that we have that conversation. I will reference two biblical stories to prove a point, but I promise I won't get too churchy. So here we go. To stay consistent with the message of the week, today's reference point comes from a gentleman that unknowingly reminded me of who I was. And that quote today is from Joel Osteen, and it reads, "Fear and faith have something in common. They both ask us to believe in something that we cannot see." When you really think about that quote, you can acknowledge the truth that's in it. So by definition, faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. It's also a strong belief in the doctrines of religion based on spiritual conviction rather than proof. By definition, fear is an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation of awareness of danger. If you were to draw a circle comparison chart with fear on one side and faith on the other, you will see that they are clearly two different things. But what makes them the same, as the opening quote states, is that they both center around something that is unseen. Both faith and fear are strong attributes, but we are taught, sometimes through life experiences, to do one more than the other. If you're like me and you grew up in the church, you were taught almost every Sunday to have faith in the unseen. But when it comes to the uncertainty, if it feels too good to be true, has certainly done more harm than good. There are a lot of parables or stories in the Bible that stand out to me when it pertains to having faith, and they speak to the point that I'm trying to make today. So my first example, if we look at the story of Job, we will see a true testament of faith. Job was a very rich man, both in abundance and in family. And in his possession, he had a great number of livestock. He had 10 children, and his house was intact. And by intact, I mean, everybody loved each other. Everybody, basically they loved each other, and they did what you do when you love people. One day, Satan questioned Job's loyalty to God, and God gave Satan the authority to touch everything except the man himself to prove a point that Job would not turn his back on his faith. As the story goes, he lost all of his cattle, sheep, and his ox. All 10 of his children died. He even broke out in hives, and he eventually lost everything that he had. Throughout all that he lost, Job never lost faith. Even though his friends tried to convince him that he had do something wrong, Job never turned his back. For his faithfulness, God restored everything that he lost times 2. He doubled the livestock, he gave him a new family, he restored his health, and etc. The next story to tie into this conversation is of Daniel in the lion's den. According to the story, King Darius was the leader of Babylon, and he authorized a group of men to help him lead the land. And Daniel, who was the leader of the group, was a believer in God, and that caused the other men to not like Daniel. The other men had formed an alliance and conspired to get rid of Daniel. The plan was to convince King Darius to make a new law in which people could only worship the king and not God. And if they prayed to other gods, they would be thrown into the den of lions. They did this under assumption that a starving lion would enjoy a free meal. Although this new law was set in stone, Daniel remained faithful in his commitment and his prayer. He prayed multiple times a day with the window open, and when the other men saw him, they took their discovery to the king. The king liked Daniel, but he had to stand on the law, and he threw Daniel into the lion's den. Before he left, he said, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." That night, the king couldn't sleep, and as soon as morning came, he ran to check on Daniel. The king called out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, Has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? In which Daniel replied, May the king live forever. My God has sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. Elated in his discovery, the king ordered the guards to get Daniel out of the lion's den, excuse me. They also noticed that he didn't have a scratch on his body. At the king's word, he called on the men who falsely accused Daniel, threw them in a den along with their wives and children. And this is coming straight from the book. And before they could reach the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all of their bones. The king wrote to all nations as like a worldwide broadcast that God was real because he saved Daniel from the lion's den, and Daniel prospered until the end of his life. There are more stories in the Bible that exhibit stories of faith, but I believe these two speak to our journey of self-improvement the most. Bad things happen to good people every day. Like Job, without cause or reason, everything just seems to fall apart. It's completely understandable to be frustrated when you encounter adversity, but the disconnect happens when we blame God or the universe for said adversity. Even if you don't believe in God, when bad things happen, the best thing we can do for ourselves is to remain steadfast to the process. Same goes for the story of Daniel. You will always have people, like we talked about in previous episodes, that are insecure in their own lives and are willing to tear you down just to lift themselves up. If you can be willing to protect your seed while they drag your name through the mud, that same mud that they try to bury you in will be the same ground that your harvest comes from. You may not have lost everything like Job. You have been in a literal lion's den like Daniel. But I'm willing to bet at some point in your life, things fell apart just when you thought everything was sweet. You may have had people falsely accuse you of something simply because they didn't like you. But if you can stay committed to the cause, the plan, the process, and the vision, you will be restored tenfold. Some people live their lives in fear, and like in horror movies, the hunter always can sniff the scent of fear. Just like the hunter, an uncontrolled mind can also smell fear and will concoct imaginary situations that won't ever happen to get you to remain paralyzed and unable to move past certain parts of your life. This is your moment of declaration where you break free from doubt, where you break free from the complaints, the comparison, the procrastination, and you step into your purpose. Because to go back to the opening quote, faith and fear both ask us to believe in something we cannot see. It's also important to note in both stories that it didn't say Daniel and Job had faith by doing nothing. They practiced their faith by continuously giving thanks regardless of their situation. We should learn to do the same. A lot of people think faith is believing something good will happen, but it's way deeper than that. When you operate from a space of fear, you only see lack of opportunity, resources, and you only see the negative outcomes. However, if you operate from a place of faith, you're relying on the work that nobody sees to put you in that next category. Again, there are a great number of people out there that get jealous when they see someone have the confidence to chase their dreams. It's people out here willing to tear somebody down, all because they have already created a narrative in their mind that they are going to forget them when they get to where they're going. Let this episode be your reminder to not operate in fear. This episode is your reminder to operate in faith and not fear. That's enough. There's enough out here for everybody. But as we all know, fortune favors the bold. We both know that your journey to get to this episode hasn't been easy. You've been on your knees, you're bleeding, you're emotionally scarred and bruised. But this is your reminder that you're also still alive. You may be in a moment of confusion or chaos, but this is your reminder to not lose faith in the process. If you can stay committed to your process despite everything you've lost, like Job, you will be rewarded for your long suffering. If you can keep working despite the negative narratives, like Daniel, those false claims will be debunked And the people that are accusing you will be the ones that suffer the most in their karma. So, with that being said, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I hope today's message inspired you to not only live in faith and not fear, but to also not curse the Creator for the adversities that we face. Everything truly happens for a reason, and I've said this on countless occasions. If we can remain grateful and still show up for ourselves, we take control of the narrative, we put the work in, everything that we lost will be restored. So if you enjoyed that message today, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to the campaign. Make sure you tell the homies about it. Make sure check out saucebradybooks.com. Grab you a copy of The Power of Belief, because I'm telling you, it's what you need to move past that fear and to operate in the space of faith. So with that being said, man, roll that shit up. It's your boy. Get lifted. Stay inspired. Peace.